Hi, this is my second video for our shared shelf, and these questions are about the research for the book. So arpanagurungx asks, what was the biggest hurdle writing this book and how did you overcome it? I would say there were two main hurdles that I want to mention. The first is that because I was writing a non-fiction book, I was obviously reliant on what I could find in my research to write the book, and there were necessarily some holes in that research. You know, people didn't write things down, a journalist didn't ask that question of a woman in a newspaper interview, she didn't write about it in a letter, so that was quite difficult. So to give you an example, Catherine Donahue never spoke publicly about how she felt about her radium poisoning diagnosis, and that is such a important moment in the narrative that it, you know, for the reader it sort of leaves a bit of an emotional hole not to be able to know. And because it is non-fiction, I can't just make it up. So how I overcame that hurdle was to simply address it head on, to be honest. So there is a bit in the book where it says Catherine never spoke publicly about how she felt. But what I then did was to use a quotation from one of her friends, Pearl, about how Pearl felt about her diagnosis. And I was able to say it's possible that Catherine felt the same as Pearl, or perhaps, you know, she felt similar emotions. We don't know. But to be able to use Pearl's voice, even though I didn't have Catherine's, was part of the way that I worked around that problem. I think the other hurdle was the big group of women that I was writing about. It was, you know, I was aware that it was an overwhelmingly large group, so how I tried to overcome that hurdle was to try to make each woman individual. So I tried to, you know, kind of say, well, this woman is the family woman, this is the woman who likes jokes, this woman is a real sort of, you know, reformer, she's a fighter who will persevere. And so I tried to individualise each woman so that even though I was writing about a large group, hopefully the reader could empathise with them as individuals and recognise who it was that they were now reconnecting with in the narrative. And for that reason, that's why there's the list of names at the front of the book. My husband actually is responsible for that list because he was my first reader, and as he was reading he was saying, I'm really sorry but I'm getting confused about who is who, and so he suggested that we add that list, and hopefully that does help other readers keep track of everyone. A question from GoodReads says, can you give us some background anecdotes of interesting moments you encountered while researching the book? I think for me the most compelling and overwhelming moment was finding the letters between Catherine Donahue and Pearl Payne. That was partly because these were the women I had directed in the play through which I'd found the story. So it was just extraordinary to be able to, you know, find these letters, hear the voices of these women that I had, you know, worked with actresses to portray, but now this was their reality. And the second reason it was so amazing was because of how difficult it actually was to track down those letters. So I'd heard on the grapevine that this museum where I found them did have some Radium Girls material. But when I went there, they only had on display a photograph, a single photograph of the girls at work, and that was it. And so I really had to sort of persevere and persist. So I asked the docent and she was like, no, this is all we have. I asked her to ask her manager, and it was the manager who said, yes, you know, well, he actually didn't say, yes, we've got stuff. He said, oh, I think there's a folder in the back. And so I found those letters in this folder on a shelf in the back room of this tiny local museum, and it just felt so special to stumble across them. And I'm very pleased to say that those letters are now on display. So in me stumbling across them, the museum have rediscovered them too. But that was a really special moment for me to hold their letters in my hands, to trace the pencil that they had used to sign their names, and to read their own words about how they felt. That was a really, really special moment for me in my research. Sorry, I was finding a question. excuse me, several people have asked me how long it took me to do the research. Now, that is an interesting question because, of course, I researched the play first, so I spent months researching the play. But once I got my book deal, I worked full-time on this story. So I was able to dedicate every waking moment to it, and I did. I worked weekends, I worked 16, 18-hour days. My husband didn't see me. So I was really full-time on it. But the short answer to the question, how long did it take? I spent a month in America researching, and I think in total it probably took me about 4 months to go through everything and then a month to write the book. But I write really fast. So Tsunami Morrison asks, how did you keep yourself mentally stable when you got in depth with the stories of the girls? Which is a similar question to niccitylightsnyc, who says, how hard was it for you in doing all your research not to cry your eyes out with the pain, suffering and sexism these women went through? Well, the answer is, how hard was it not to cry? The answer is that I did cry. I would sit at my desk with tears streaming down my face. That was going through the research. That was sitting in the Library of Congress reading the medical reports. That was actually writing the book. So a lot of the time when I was writing, I was crying as well. So how hard was it not to cry? Well, it was impossible not to cry. That's the short answer. And how did I keep myself mentally stable? I don't know about that. Perhaps I didn't. I was just immersed in these girls' world. As I say, I worked full-time on it. It was the only thing that I was living and breathing. You know, I barely took any time off for Christmas, and even, I was kind of at my family's for 2 days. And even then I was thinking about the girls. I was thinking about, you know, just sort of marinating in their story. So I don't know about how I kept myself mentally stable. I just lived it with them, and that was what I had to do to tell their story. And a final question for this video is from Rory Pond, and they say, was it difficult to write a non-fiction story in the tone of a story versus just giving us cold hard facts? And which Radium girl has inspired you the most? For me, it wasn't difficult to write non-fiction as a narrative. When I was a publisher, that was the kind of non-fiction I liked to publish. And I think, I mean, nothing is more interesting than other people. And I think what novels do so well is they take you inside people, which you can't necessarily do with non-fiction, but I try to do because I had the women's own words. So for me, it wasn't a struggle. That's how I like to read my non-fiction. I think that's what makes it compelling. And which Radium girl has inspired me the most? That's a really hard question to answer. I think the two that sort of lead the narrative are Grace Fryer and Catherine Donahue. So possibly them, but to be honest, every Radium girl was courageous. You know, you look at Catherine Sharp and her mental health and what she had to overcome. She is quite remarkable too, so I'm not sure you can pick out just one. They all inspire me every day, and I hope they do the same for you. Thank you.